He let me walk away after saying, "You deserve more than I can fight for." Last month, I looked him in the eye as I headlined the event his family sponsored. I remember the clink of silverware against fine china. The roast was overcooked, the wine was average, but the judgment in her eyes, that was sharp enough to draw blood. His mother smiled the whole time she said it. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. She just leaned in slightly toward her son and whispered like she was sharing a terrible secret. "She's not wife material. She didn't know I heard. Or maybe she did and just didn't care." Either way, I sat there folding my napkin like it was the only thing keeping me from unraveling. That night I learned something about rich families. They don't scream when they want you gone. They just use quiet knives. I wasn't what she wanted for her son. I wasn't the kind of woman who smiled and nodded and blended in. I asked questions, challenged opinions. I didn't come from money. My family was middle class, loud, messy, and proud of it. I worked in creative marketing, freelanced between contracts. I wasn't stable. I didn't dress like old money. I didn't talk like a debutante. But I loved her son. And I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. It wasn't. Over the next few weeks, the comments started to pile up. "She's lovely, but she talks so much. Do you really think freelancing is a long-term career? She's intense, isn't she?" I started to feel like a project they were trying to fix, not a person they were trying to know. His sister once told me over coffee, "You'd be a fun girlfriend. But our family's different. We're looking for someone who fits, like a shoe, like a mold, like a quiet ornament on a wealthy man's shelf." I should have walked away then. Should have said, "If I don't fit, maybe I'm not meant to shrink for you." But I stayed. Because I loved him. And I thought foolishly that love might make him brave. It didn't. One night after another exhausting dinner, filled with smiles that felt like daggers, we sat in his apartment. Lights low, my shoes off. I asked him, "Do you believe her?" He didn't look up from his glass. I pressed, "Do you think I'm not wife material?" He sighed. And then said the line that I would replay for years. "They're right. You deserve someone who truly sees you. But I can't fight them forever." I didn't cry in front of him. I didn't beg, didn't plead. I just nodded, stood up, and left. I walked 3 blocks barefoot before I even realized I'd forgotten my heels. The air that night was cold, but I didn't feel it. My skin was burning from the inside out. They said I wasn't soft enough, polished enough, quiet enough, good enough. They didn't want a woman with a mind of her own. They wanted someone they could present like a business acquisition that made their legacy look better. And I wasn't part of their legacy plan, so I disappeared from theirs. But what they didn't know, what even he didn't realize, was that something else had started to flicker to life inside me that night. Not rage, not bitterness. Something colder, sharper. A vow I made only to myself. One day your daughters will wish they were me, but for now I stayed quiet. I stayed gone, and I got to work. The first few days after the breakup were silent. Not peaceful, just empty. I'd wake up and forget for a moment that everything had shifted. Then it would hit like a cold wave crashing through my chest. I'd stare at my phone knowing no one was going to call. Not him, not his family, not anyone who mattered in that version of my life. It felt like I'd been erased from a story I wasn't done telling. I replayed everything, every dinner, every sideways glance, every whispered comment. I kept asking myself the same question. Was I really the problem? Was I too much, too loud, too opinionated? Or was I just not what they were used to? I didn't want to be a victim, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't the kind of woman people choose to build a life with. Maybe I was only meant to be temporary, a phase, a test he failed. That thought alone nearly broke me, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I left. I packed 2 suitcases and booked a one-way ticket out of the city. No long goodbye, no dramatic declarations. Just me, a notebook, and a promise to disappear before I lost any more pieces of myself. I moved to a smaller town, quiet, coastal, slower. I found a sublet above a bookstore and made just enough freelancing to get by. But I knew I couldn't keep floating like that. The work I once loved, branding, content strategy, digital campaigns, started to feel meaningless. Like I was helping people polish masks while I was still figuring out my own face. So I paused everything and enrolled in night classes. Psychology, gender studies, public speaking. I didn't have a plan, just a hunger I couldn't explain. Around the same time, I started writing again. Not for clients, not for pay, for myself. I created a tiny blog, just a blank space on the internet where I could say the things I'd never said out loud. I called it The Things We Were Never Taught. At first it was clumsy, raw, too personal. I didn't care. I wrote about all the things women are expected to shrink for, about how we're taught to equate softness with value, about the pressure to be agreeable, palatable wife material. I wrote about being called too much, about being left, about pretending you're okay when you're not. And something strange happened. People started reading. At first it was just a few comments, a handful of shares. Then came the emails. Women from all over different cities, different lives, telling me they felt the same. That they too had been told to sit down and smile more. That they too had been labeled not enough or too much by people who never really saw them. I wasn't just writing a blog anymore. I was building a mirror, and other women were seeing themselves in it. The community grew quietly, almost accidentally. No SEO, no promotion, just honesty. I was no longer trying to fit into someone else's mold. I was crafting my own space, word by word, post by post. I didn't have money, I didn't have stability. But for the first time in a long time, I had clarity. I knew who I was. Not a project, not a placeholder, not someone waiting to be chosen. I was a woman with a voice, and apparently I wasn't the only one tired of being silenced. The blog was never meant to be a movement, but the truth has a way of pulling people toward it, especially when they've been taught to stay quiet. After a few months, I realized the words on a page weren't enough. I wanted people to hear me, not just what I said, but how I said it, with the pauses, the frustration, the fire in my voice that couldn't be translated through a blinking cursor. So I started a podcast. No fancy setup. Just a secondhand mic and a blanket over my desk to kill the echo. I called it the same name as the blog, The Things We Were Never Taught. In the first episode, my voice shook. I over-edited. I hated how I sounded. But I hit publish anyway, and women listened. They messaged me at midnight on their lunch breaks after long days of pretending they were fine. They said I thought I was the only one. And that was enough to keep me going. One podcast episode became 2. Then 5, then a weekly rhythm. Soon I was bringing on guests, other women who had rebuilt themselves from ashes. We talked about money, boundaries, rage, freedom. Not in the way glossy magazines did, but in a way that made us feel seen. The community grew not viral, but solid. Women were showing up because they needed more than platitudes. They needed permission. Around that time, I launched a small online course. It was messy, imperfect, a blueprint for women who wanted to build careers on their own terms. I didn't sell dreams. I taught skills, pitching, branding, public speaking, negotiating without apology. The tagline was simple. You don't need to marry rich. You just need to stop playing small. Of course, some people laughed, especially the ones from my old life. An ex-friend messaged me. So you're a life coach now. You used to be so cool. Someone else tweeted a screenshot of one of my videos with the caption, another one of those empowerment queens. I'll admit it stung. Reinvention doesn't come with armor. But I was done living for their approval. And anyway, I had bigger problems. Like working 15-hour days trying to keep everything afloat. Like getting scammed out of $2,000 by a fake ad agency promising sponsorship deals. Like doing live streams to an audience of 3, one of whom was my mother. I cried more than once. There were days I almost quit. Nights I stared at my bank account and wondered if I'd made a mistake chasing something so uncertain. But every time I thought about stopping, I remembered her. The girl I used to be sitting at that dinner table folding her napkin while they decided she wasn't enough. I wasn't building for applause. I was building for her. So I kept going. And slowly things shifted. An editor from a mid-sized magazine reached out for an interview. Then a spot on a women's business panel. Then a feature in a podcast roundup that boosted my downloads overnight. Suddenly, the same voice they once said was too much was now being quoted in headlines. I didn't blow up. I built up. Brick by careful brick. And with every new level, I didn't forget why I started. I wasn't trying to prove I was wife material. I was proving I was my own material. I didn't need to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. The question came from a girl in the third row. She looked maybe 20, notebook in hand, voice a little shaky, the kind of young woman I used to be. Hungry, unsure, and still hoping the world would meet her halfway. We were wrapping up a TEDx panel on building unconventional careers. I just finished speaking about rebuilding after rejection, about forging value when you're told you don't have any. And then her hand went up. She said, "How do I convince my mom I don't need to marry rich to be respected?" The words hit me like a slap. Not because of the question itself, but because I'd heard them before. Years ago, in a polished dining room over a glass of expensive wine, his mother had smiled and said the same thing almost word for word. "Sweetheart, marrying up is the only real plan." She said it casually, like it was obvious, like it was gospel. I remember how small I felt then. Like all my dreams, degrees, and ambition were just cute distractions from the real goal, becoming someone's +1 to a legacy. That memory hadn't surfaced in years, not in full color like that. But in that moment, with that girl's voice echoing through the auditorium, I felt it all over again. The sting, the dismissal, the bone-deep insult of being told your worth depends on someone else's wealth. I walked to the edge of the stage, looked straight at her, and said, "You don't have to convince her. You just have to build something she can't ignore." The room went quiet. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about that question wouldn't let go of me. It wasn't just personal, it was systemic, generational. A wound passed down through whispers and wedding rings. I realized I'd spent years helping women heal, but now it was time to help them build. Not just confidence, not just healing, equity, power, ownership. So I shifted gears. The podcast stayed, but I launched a new series, focused on financial independence. I brought in guest investors, founders, women who built companies from their kitchen tables. We talked money in plain language, no sugarcoating, no patronizing tips about cutting lattes. Then I created my first mentorship circle, a private group where women could ask real questions about money, value, risk, growth. We didn't talk about being wife material. We talked about being asset material for ourselves. That mentorship circle turned into a pilot course. That course turned into a global platform. We called it Rise Without Permission. It grew faster than I could keep up with. Women from 30 countries, speakers from finance, tech, media, partnerships with female-led companies, government grants, corporate sponsorships, invitations to speak at global summits. And through it all, I kept remembering that one voice from the third row. The girl who asked, "How do I convince my mom?" I never told her this. But she didn't just ask a question, she started a movement. I wasn't building this because I wanted revenge anymore. This wasn't about one man or one family. It was about rewriting the blueprint they tried to hand us. We were never meant to shrink ourselves into the wife role just to be seen. We were meant to expand until we became the standard. I wasn't a phase anymore, I was a founder. The email sat in my inbox for 2 days before I even opened it. The subject line was simple: invitation to partner, Youth Women's Leadership Gala. At first, I almost ignored it. I get a lot of inquiries now, events, panels, mentorship deals. Most of them blur together, but something about this one felt familiar. I opened the message, scanned the name, and froze. The invitation was from her, his mother, the same woman who once leaned over roast beef and whispered that I wasn't wife material. The same woman who dismissed me like a seasonal accessory to her son's life. She had no idea. The message was professional, cordial, full of admiration. "We're curating an event to empower the next generation of young women. We'd love to feature your platform as a model of independence, ambition, and impact. Your voice aligns with everything we want our daughters to grow into." Daughters. I stared at that line longer than I should have. The woman who once saw me as a threat to her legacy now wanted to align her organization with mine, not realizing I was the woman she once cast aside. She didn't recognize the name, of course. My brand didn't use my full name, just my first and last initial. And in most public appearances, I went by my middle name, a quiet choice I made years ago to separate myself from that past life. It wasn't revenge, it was protection, a soft boundary between who I was and who I became. But now that boundary felt like power. I replied to her assistant, kept it short, polite, said I was open to a preliminary Zoom call. No mention of the history, no indication that I knew exactly who she was. Because I didn't need her to know. I just needed to see. The Zoom meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. When the screen blinked on, she was there, perfectly styled pearls, and all in the same controlled elegance I remembered. She smiled as if we were old friends, introduced herself and the initiative, thanked me for my time. "We've been following your work for months," she said. "Your message, it's exactly the kind of thing we need our girls to hear." I nodded once. Let her keep talking. "We want them to grow up knowing they don't have to depend on anyone, that their voice matters, that they can build something real." Ironic, isn't it, coming from the woman who once believed marrying up was the only real plan? She kept going. "We're so impressed with what you've built. It's inspiring. We'd love for you to headline a panel, maybe even deliver the keynote. If you're available, of course." I could have told her. I could have stopped her mid-sentence. Could have reminded her of that dinner, of her words, of how small she once made me feel. But I didn't, because that would have been about her. And this moment, this was mine. So I looked directly at the camera, held her gaze, and simply smiled. The ballroom was packed. It was one of those polished, high-budget leadership conferences, all white tablecloths, branded notebooks, and coffee stations that never ran dry. I had been invited as the keynote speaker. The woman they once called not wife material was now the headliner. As I waited backstage, I glanced down at the program, my name printed in bold, my face next to phrases like trailblazer, visionary, founder. Funny how words change when the world starts listening. The moment I stepped onto the stage, the applause felt distant, like echoes from a life that didn't belong to me anymore. I started my talk the way I always do, soft at first, personal, then sharper. I spoke about value, about being underestimated, about how the world tries to shrink women into silence, and how we unlearn that obedience word by word. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. Toward the end, as I scanned the crowd, something caught my eye. Second row, slightly to the left, his mother. Hair perfectly curled. Same pearls, same posture. Next to her, a teenage girl, probably 16 or 17, eyes wide. Hands folded tightly in her lap, like she was trying to absorb every syllable. And behind them, him, older, tired in the way only regret can make a person look. For a moment, I paused. Just half a second. Long enough for me to know. Then I continued like nothing happened. When the talk ended, the room stood to clap. Some people cheered. Some wiped their eyes. And she, the girl, rushed to the front with her phone clutched in her hand. Her mother, elegant and smiling, followed. She was glowing with pride, not realizing the irony blooming in the air around us. She stepped forward, gently placing her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "She absolutely adores you," she said. "Would you mind taking a quick photo with her? You're everything I've always wanted her to look up to." I looked at her, face to face, same eyes, same voice, same air of certainty, but still, no recognition, not even a flicker. I smiled and posed with the girl who whispered thank you like it was sacred. Then, just as they were about to turn away, I saw him, standing a few feet behind, frozen, and I knew he knew. He didn't smile, didn't approach. He just stood there holding eye contact like he wanted to say something, anything. An apology, a memory, a why. I walked over. He reached out first, tentative, like touching the past might break it. Our hands met in a brief shake. No words, just a polite, distant gesture between two people who once thought they'd build a life together. I held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and then I turned. I didn't need to tell him what he lost. He could see it, and so could his mother, even if she still didn't realize who I was. She had raised a daughter who admired me, and that was enough. They never did figure it out. Not during the event. Not in the thank you emails afterward. Not when they reposted photos of their daughters standing beside me, captioning it, "So proud of this moment." And honestly, that's fine. They don't need to know who I used to be. Because I do. I know the version of me who sat through silent dinners, gripping a napkin, like it was a lifeline. I know the girl who walked home barefoot, heart cracked open, after being told she wasn't the kind of woman people marry. I know her because I became her, and then I became someone else entirely. And all of it, it wasn't to prove them wrong. I never chased success to show them. I didn't build a platform out of spite. I didn't write speeches with them in mind. I built for me, for the women like me, for the girls coming after us. But if I'm being honest, There's something undeniably sweet about poetic justice, especially when you don't have to say a word. Now sometimes I see their names pop up in my inbox. Mothers from my old life. Teachers who once warned me I was too opinionated. Former friends who rolled their eyes at my blog. They write asking if I'd be willing to mentor their daughters, to speak at their school, to offer career advice. I've never replied, but I read them, every single one, not out of bitterness, but because it reminds me that the version of me they once dismissed, she grew into someone they now want their daughters to become. My life today doesn't look like anything they planned for me or feared. I didn't marry into wealth. I didn't settle down in some manicured neighborhood where appearances matter more than peace. I didn't become anyone's trophy, anyone's perfect fit. Instead, I chose a life that fits me, a home filled with laughter and softness and space to be exactly who I am, a partner who never asks me to shrink, a circle of friends who don't flinch when I speak my mind, a career built from truth, not image. I don't live to be a wife. I live to be me, whole, unapologetic, free. And the more I've grown, the more I've learned to value what isn't loud. Silence, stillness, restraint. I don't need to shout my worth anymore. I don't need to burn bridges to feel powerful. I just stay the course and keep building. Because the greatest revenge, if you even want to call it that, is creating a life so full, so rich, so yours, that the people who once overlooked you can only watch from the sidelines. They said I wasn't wife material. Maybe I'm not. But I am the blueprint.